And we are live. Hello everyone, I hope you're doing well on this fine Tuesday. Yes, we are Tuesday evening. Welcome. Let me put my stuff aside. So I'm just checking that things on Twitter are working well. Looks like it. Alright, so we're good. We're good. So welcome, as I said, welcome for the news review of the week. Which you're doing well. The beginning of the week was nice for you. You had a good weekend. On the menu today, what do we have on the menu today? We are going to talk about the latest drama within the EU circles, which is involving one of our favorite bad guy, which is, of course, our good old Viktor Orban, Prime Minister of Hungary, who at the last moment has threatened to impose the veto and blocked a couple of important decisions related to Ukraine. Just as we were approaching, we are the 24th of February, which is the 4th anniversary of the start of the war in Ukraine, of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, during which the EU was planning to announce a bunch of things for Ukraine, and Orban, in a classic Orban, is spoiling the party with vetoes, which pissing off a lot of people, because at least some of the decisions were supposed to have been agreed by Orban, etc. So we're going to discuss all about this. And the second topic of the day, because we only have two topics for today, like I could have included like another one, but it was not like big news, it was more accessories, so I decided, okay, let's just focus on the two big ones. That way, that will be more than enough to discuss already. The second topic being the consequences, the aftermath of the American Supreme Court decision on the tariff announced by Donald Trump last year that were deemed illegal. So you remember in April last year, Trump had announced a tariff on basically the entire world, which was sued in court, and the Supreme Court said that, well, actually, that was illegal for Trump to do so, which is now causing a lot of discussion, a lot of questions on what's happening now, because, well, if the tariff were invalidated, what does that mean for the EU-US trade deal that was called trade agreement that was concluded last year in August to try to put an end to the war. So there's a lot of uncertainty over the past few days at the EU level over that. So we're going to read about this as well. And as usual, and especially since there is now, we only have two topics for tonight. If you have any other topics you want to discuss, well, you have 10 fingers, you have a chat. You type in the chat, and we talk. So yeah, that's the program for today. Let me adjust. All right. If there is no burning question from your side already, I guess that we can dive right in. Let me put my stuff. There we go. Yes, we're on the right article. Okay, so previously on Dragon Ball Z, so today is the 4th anniversary of the start of the war in Ukraine, so I'm putting myself in the center of the start of the war in Ukraine after the beginning of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia on the 24th of February 2022, and the EU, of course, has supported Ukraine and was planning today to formally announce the opening of a couple of decisions related to the war, namely, on the one hand, the approval of the 90 billion euro loan that the EU would make to Ukraine to help them finance themselves, because Ukraine is running out of money in April, and they badly need money. So the EU concluded at the end of last year, found an agreement to lend to the Ukrainians 90 billion euros, of which Hungary was excluded, so we will discuss about that. And they was planning to officially announce it or finalize it today, so that when they were meeting today Zelensky, because the European Commission is in Kyiv today for the occasion, so they would have been able to announce in Kyiv on the day of the anniversary that okay, the EU is giving 90 billion to Ukraine. And the second expected decision, was the 20th package of sanctions against Russia, 20th since the beginning of the war. That was also ideally would have been approved yesterday, just in time for the anniversary. And again, that is not happening. Why? Because our dear Prime Minister of Hungary, Viktor Orban, has decided to put his veto on, or to threaten rather to veto these two decisions, which is pissing off a lot of people, because it arrives at least on the 90 billion one, the loan at the last moment after there was the first approval, etc., etc. So people are pissed off, and of course it's raining on the EU's parade, as they were planning to go to Kyiv to announce a package of measures in support of Ukraine on the day of the anniversary. So people are pretty pissed off at Orban. Orban basically using the topic as a way to fuel his campaign, because he's running an electoral campaign. He's running for re-election in April, on the 12th of April, and he's using the topic of Ukraine as electoral fuel for his campaign. So no doubt that the decision to threaten a veto has more to do with the elections than the actual substance. But we're gonna read the excuse that Orban is using to justify his vetoes. All right. So first article. Clicking on the wrong place. There we go. Okay, so double Hungarian veto thwarts the loan for Ukraine and new sanctions on Russia. We should not tie together things that are not connected to each other at all, High Representative Kaja Kallas, the EU Foreign Affairs Minister, said on Monday amid a new crisis caused by back-to-back Hungarian vetoes. On the eve of the 4th anniversary of Russia's war on Ukraine, so the anniversary is actually today, the European Union has become effectively paralyzed by two back-to-back Hungarian vetoes. A 90 billion euro emergency loan for Kyiv and a new package of sanctions against Moscow are being held up by Budapest over an energy dispute involving the transit of Russian oil through the Soviet-era Druzhba pipeline. Context first. The 90 billion energy emergency loan, we have talked about it last year, at the end of last year. That was, like I said, the problem is that not Hungary, Ukraine is running out of money in April, and so they need a new source to finance themselves and the war effort. Initially, the EU wanted to use the Russian frozen assets that are currently in the EU to fund Ukraine, but that did not happen. That was not possible, partly because the Belgians blocked the decision, and so instead there was a decision to make a loan. So the EU would borrow money and give it to Kyiv, so 90 billion euro that would be given to Kyiv to allow it to finance itself for the next couple of years. There was an agreement on this at the end of the year at head of states and government level, and there was negotiations and everything, so all the political work and the legislative work had been done, and we were literally in the final stretch. It was just like the final formal approval that was supposed to happen at the end of last week. Second topic, the package of sanction against Moscow. So, like I said, the EU is on its 20th package of sanction against Russia since the beginning of the war, and so again, this one was mostly focused on maritime transport, if I recall correctly. So the goal of being to increase the pressure on Russia so that it has less means to continue its war or to finance its war against Ukraine. And all that happens, like I said, on the day of the anniversary of the war. It's a nice thing to bring the Ukrainians. And Budapest, so Hungary, Orban decided to put his veto, invoking the pipeline, the Druzhba pipeline. What is the Druzhba pipeline? It's a pipeline that goes from Russia to Hungary and Slovakia, going through Ukraine. You may remember one of the first things that the Europeans did after the beginning of the war was to reduce their dependency on Russian gas, because a number of countries were very dependent, sometimes at 100%, to Russian gas. And over the years, the wide majority of EU member states, simply reduced their reliance on Russian oil, Russian gas, and everything, to the point that some countries now have 0% of Russian gas or Russian oil. And so there were alternative routes found. Now we're buying gas from the US, from the Emirates, Norway, etc., but anything but Russia. And even it was forbidden to import in the EU oil and gas, with one exception, requested by Hungary and Slovakia, which was oil imported by pipeline from Russia, which is basically an exception covering only Hungary and Slovakia, because they have the Druzhba pipeline, and they were and still are supplying themselves with oil and gas from Russia. And where the others have used the years and EU funds to reduce the dependency on Russian gas and oil, on the contrary, Hungary in particular has increased its dependence. So it's buying more Russian oil and gas than it was before the war. Why? Because it's cheaper, and Orban is the closest EU leader, the closest leader to Russia and everything. And so all this oil is going through the Druzhba pipeline. That again goes from Russia to Hungary through Ukraine. This pipeline was damaged in January by a Russian attack. So there was no more oil passing through the pipeline. But Hungary and also Slovakia decided to use that as an opportunity to threaten a veto, saying, oh, well, it's the fault of Ukraine if the pipeline is not working because they're not going fast enough to repair things. So we are putting a veto, which again, most likely in the case of Orban, it's an electoral maneuver, because he's made his opposition to Ukraine the cornerstone of his attempt to be re-elected in April. So the fact that he's hyping up his opposition to Ukraine, including on a financial tool that is vital for them, that's politically appealing for him. So that was the context. So we should not tie together things that are not connected to each other at all. So of course the pipeline and the financing of Ukraine being completely unrelated. High Representative Kaja Kallas said on Monday morning before heading to a meeting of foreign affairs ministers that was intended to approve the sanctions. But let us listen to them explaining the reasons why they are blocking, and then see whether there are possibilities to overcome. The oil pipeline was recently damaged by an attack attributed to Russia, but Hungary has put the responsibility for the resulting supply interruption squarely on Ukraine, accusing the country of blackmail. That's pretty funny, huh? You're the one being attacked, your pipeline is being bombed, but it's your fault that the pipeline was bombed by the other guy. That's a certain logic, let's say. Over the weekend, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban announced a set of 3 countermeasures. the suspension of Hungarian diesel export to Ukraine, and simultaneous vetoes on the 90 billion loan and the 20th package of sanctions. Once oil shipments resume, normal relations will be restored, Orban said. Kiev has pushed back against what it also calls blackmail and said repair works continue amid daily threats of new missile attacks. It has also proposed alternative ways to ensure the transit of non-Russian oil to Central Europe, saying, okay, we can deliver it by sea, or we can find other ways to get you your oil, it's just that it's not going to be Russian oil because the pipeline is broken because of a Russian attack. The spiraling crisis has put Brussels in a complicated position, caught between the goal of to guarantee energy security for all member states and the urgency to provide Ukraine with the assistance it needs to resist the Russian invasion. A crisis meeting is scheduled for Wednesday. Croatia, whose Adriatic pipeline has emerged as a possible alternative, will also take part because, like I said, at the beginning of the war, many countries are heavily dependent on Russian gas and oil. But the countries say, okay, with the war, we can't let that continue, so we have to divert. And so the Commission had created a program called Repower EU to give financing and help countries, okay, diversify their energy supply so that they don't have to rely anymore on Russia for their fossil fuels. And the only one that did not do it was Hungary, because they wanted a cheap oil, and Slovakia, not because necessarily they wanted the oil for itself, but because since the pipeline, so the pipeline goes into Slovakia, through Slovakia. And pipelines, whenever you have a pipeline that goes through a country, the country concerned, so you have a pipeline going through your country, that country can basically gets a tax for the pipeline that goes through it. It's being paid for letting the pipeline through. And so that means that you have an ironic situation where for some time you had a Russian company paying Ukraine for allowing Russian oil to go through its country while there was a war waged by Russia against Ukraine. But that also means that Slovakia, who has the pipeline going through its territory, was getting paid for that pipeline. And it was not a small amount of money. It was getting half a billion euros, every year. And so the pipeline not working or not relying anymore on having Europeans not relying anymore on that oil means that Slovakia is losing money because they don't anymore they can't tax anymore the pipeline that is going through them because there's no oil going through. So for Slovakia, it's more a question of loss of revenues, where for Hungary, it's more a question of using cheap oil and gas, and also maintaining good ties with Russia. And in this context, so I just explained, the others say, well, if you want to, we understand. So the Hungarians and the Slovakians got the exemption from the ban on Russian oil and gas by saying, well, we are landlocked countries, we don't have any seas around us, so that means we can't import gas and oil coming from other countries. Like we don't have ports, so the oil can't come in. So we need the pipelines to get our energy. Hence, we need the Russian pipeline. And Croatia, which manages a pipeline that can go through until Hungary, was saying, well, that's not a big deal. You can just change, instead of getting your oil from the Russians through the Druzhba pipeline, you can get it from us. We have a pipeline that goes to Hungary, and your problem is solved. Hungary refused, officially for reasons of price. They say, yeah, the Croatians are asking too much money for that to happen. Also political reasons, because that he wants to maintain good relations with the Russians. It's something that he can use to blackmail the Europeans, etc., etc. But yeah, that's why you have Croatia that is involved, because it can be the alternative to that pipeline going from Russia. So the European Commission was keen to have the 20th round of sanctions, which includes a full ban on services for Russian oil tankers, green-lighted by the time the war turns 4 years old on Tuesday, 24th February. So you had a ban on Russian oil and gas imported from the sea. So you could not, in theory, you can't have any more. But the Russians, in reactions, developed what is called the Shadow Fleet, which is a fleet of old tankers that are immatriculated in other countries, etc., that basically they use to keep exporting their oil and gas and circumventing sanctions. So you have this phantom vessel, which is like something like a is it 300 or 400? Hundreds of ships that are in very bad states and everything, but so they put oil rather on that ship. The ship goes out, turns off the transponder, and will either meet another tanker and transfer its oil into the other tanker, and then the other tanker will whitewash the oil, say, oh no, that's not oil from Russia, I didn't stop in Russia, it's oil from somewhere else, and then that means that allows them to resell Russian oil and the Russians to be paid for that oil, or that Shadow Fleet then circumvents the Europe and basically the Western countries to deliver its oil elsewhere. And so the Europeans are quite keen to shut down as much as they can this Shadow Fleet in the case of the 20th round of sanctions by preventing any of these tankers from receiving services from Europe to not even maintain, but to allow these ships to pass and get repairs and that sort of things. So Callas said that unfortunately it was unlikely the package would be agreed on Monday due to the very strong statement from the Hungarian government. Swedish Foreign Minister Maja Malmer Stenergard told Euronews that the blockade was a shame and a disgrace. Every delay that we have in the adoption of a sanction package is a failure for Europe, Stenergard said. I'm not giving up yet. France's Jean-Noël Barrot said that everyone must keep their commitments, while Estonia's Margus Tsahkna said there was no reason for the deadlock. Hungary's veto of the 90 billion loan is particularly controversial because the financial aid has already been approved by the European Parliament, as well as the highest political level by the EU leaders at an all-night summit in December, with Orban negotiating a complete opt-out for his country. So basically, on that loan, the discussion had already happened. They had already negotiated with Orban back in December, saying, okay, you don't want to be part of the loan to Ukraine because you don't want to finance Ukraine for whatever reason. Fine. We simply don't include you. Meaning we still do the 90 billion, but you will not put a single euro in it. You won't have to pay for anything. So you are excluded from it. And so Orban got an opt-out, as well as Slovakia and the Czech Republic. And after this opt-out, Orban agreed. He said, okay, fine, you can go with this. So there was a deal that was negotiated already with Hungary to allow this loan to be made. Then you had the legal proposal of the Commission, the Parliament approved it, etc. And so now you were supposed to just have like the formal approval, which was supposed to be like a very easy thing because at the highest political level, the deal was approved. And then Hungary is coming back on its word, saying, "Oh well, that deal that I approved in December, now I'm not approving it anymore," which is unusual for Orban and unusual for this sort of deals. Meaning that the other are pissed off because, well, you gave us your word, you approved the deal, and now you're coming back on it. That's not the way it works. Slovakia, which has also halted diesel export to Ukraine, and the Czech Republic were also exempted from the loan. So Slovakia has also taken measures against Ukraine. The Czechs, on their side, they are not doing anything against Ukraine. Kiev has warned that it needs fresh assistance as early as April, given the complete withdrawal of American donations since the re-election of United States President Donald Trump. To further complicate the matter, the vetoes come as Orban fights a re-election campaign in which his government's opposition to Kiev and Brussels feature prominently. Hungary goes to the poll on the 12th of April. So again, most likely, there is a heavy link with the Hungarian elections because Orban has made his opposition to Brussels and Ukraine the center of his political campaign. Let's continue. Sorry, I have something in my eye. It's pretty annoying. I don't know where it is. Streamer becomes blind on stream. That's perfect. Alright. Up. That I can move. Alright. Let's continue. So the EU accuses Hungary of disloyalty for vetoing the 90 billion loan to Ukraine. Hungary's decision to veto the 90 billion loan for Ukraine has received strong rebuke from other EU countries, which see it as an act of disloyalty. The top leadership of the EU has sharply accused Hungary of breaching the bloc's principle of sincere cooperation after the country unexpectedly decided to veto a 90 billion loan to Ukraine over an unrelated energy dispute. So the principle of sincere cooperation, it's in the treaties, is the idea that the countries, the member states of the EU, are bound by the principle that they must cooperate in all honesty with each other, and basically when there is a decision that is taken, you're supposed to keep your word. You can't say one thing and then do the contrary the next day. Once you do something, once you say something, you're bound by your word. Which is why it was highly unusual that Orban came back on his word given in December on regarding that loan. The financial assistance program was agreed in December by heads of states and government after grueling negotiations. It was in the very last stage of the legislative process, with the first disbursement expected to be made in early April. Hungary, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic has secured an opt-out from the scheme, so that was the thing they negotiated back in December. So Orban is blocking a file, a loan, that it was not impacting whatsoever Hungary because they were not going to pay a cent into this. It's really regrettable, High Representative Karika said at the end of the meeting with the Foreign Affairs Minister on Monday. It's not really in accordance with the sincere cooperation clause that we have in the EU treaties. Separately, Antonio Costa, the President of the European Council, so the institutions where you have all the heads of states and government, told the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban that decisions blessed by the 27 leaders must be respected. When leaders reach a consensus, they are bound by their decision. Any breach of this commitment constitutes a violation of the principle of sincere cooperation, Costa said in a letter sent to Orban on Monday and seen by Euronews. No member state can be allowed to undermine the credibility of decisions taken collectively by the European Council. Speaking in Paris, French President Emmanuel Macron echoed the sentiment. I am confident when I say I am determined because I know that the political commitments and the promises made at the last European Council will be honored. It cannot be otherwise, Macron said. The dispute relates to the Soviet-era Druzhba pipeline, which crosses Ukraine and brings Russian crude oil to Hungary and Slovakia thanks to a sanction exemption. Again, normally you can't bring directly Russian oil inside the EU, except for pipelines that are land-based, which was an exemption that was negotiated for Hungary and Slovakia. The conduit was severely damaged in late January by a drone attack attributed to Russia. However, both Hungary and Slovakia have blamed Ukraine for the subsequent halt in delivery. Since mid-February, Ukraine refuses to restore the transfer of crude oil via the Druzhba pipeline to Hungary due to political consideration and in violation of its international obligations, Orban wrote in his letter to Costa. So he's saying, Ukraine refuses to repair fast enough the pipeline. They want to create an increase of price in the election so that then I get beaten at the election, blah, blah, blah. And so I'm putting my veto in retaliation. This is an unprovoked act of hostility that undermines the energy security of Hungary, bearing in mind that the energy security of Hungary is not really threatened because they have strategic reserves and they can get oil from elsewhere, for instance, Croatia. Kyiv has said emergency repair works are ongoing, but cautioned that the relentless Russian bombardment is complicating the efforts. It has also proposed setting up an alternative route through the Odessa-Broby pipeline to bring in seaborne crude. So the Ukrainians were even offering an alternative to that. They were not saying, oh no, you don't have any oil anymore, sucks to be you. They're saying, no, okay, we can't get you the oil through that pipeline because it's broken, but we can get you oil by another mean. The Hungarian and Slovak ultimatum should be directed only to the Kremlin. These two countries cannot hold the entire EU hostage. We call on both to engage in constructive cooperation and responsible behavior. Ukrainian Foreign Minister... long day. So Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha said. On top of the 90 billion loan for Ukraine, Hungary has also vetoed a new round of sanctions against Russia, which Brussels wanted to approve by the 24th of February, the 4th anniversary of the full-scale invasion. The outrage was tangible on Monday as foreign affairs ministers, wearing lapel pins in the color of the Ukrainian flag, made their way into the meeting. I am astonished by the Hungarian position, said Germany's Johann Wadefull. I don't think it is right if Hungary betrays its own fight for freedom and European sovereignty. So we will once again come to the Hungarians with our arguments, in Budapest, but of course also here in Brussels, for them to reconsider their position. Speaking to Euronews, Lithuania's Kęstutis Budrys called for an overhaul, which is the Lithuanian foreign affairs minister, called for an overhaul of the voting rules to avoid what he described as the exploitation of the principle of unanimity. So ever since the beginning of the war in Ukraine and the fact that every round of sanctions, Hungary threatens to put a veto to obtain concessions in other fields, or weaken the sanctions, or do favors for Putin, etc., etc. There's been growing calls to change the rules on that because when it comes to foreign affairs and sanctions, those decisions are taken in council at unanimity. So everyone has a veto, which is kind of the exception because on most topics, it's a majority decision. But foreign affairs, sanctions, it's unanimity. And Orban has exploited this unanimity often on to take things that are completely unrelated, either to get money or to get concession on other files, etc., etc. And so that has pissed off quite a few leaders that the vetoes are weaponized that way by Hungary. Hungary has blocked one of the three elements of the 90 billion loan that amends the EU budget rules and depends on unanimous consent. So, again, the other two regulations, which outline the structure and conditions for the assistance, were approved on Friday. So, again, like a weaponization of veto, the loan depends on three different texts. Two of them are taken at a majority. One of them, depends on unanimity. And so Hungary was in minority on the two other, because it's taken majority, but it exploited the one veto it had to block the entire package. We cannot be disrupted each time by these vetoes, Boudry said. Just to explain why it depends on that text was on unanimity, because that's the part that relates to the budget. So anything that relates to the EU budget is taken on unanimity through unanimity decision. Meanwhile, Sweden's Maria Malmer Stenergard said the double Hungarian veto was a disgrace and a shame. We need to make sure Ukraine gets that money. Around 2/3 of their budgetary needs for the 2 years will be covered by this loan, and they need this, so we must find a way, Stenergard told Euronews. Regarding the timing of Hungary's decision, the Swedish minister believes it might be tied to the general election in April, a key vote in which Orban is trailing in polls by double digits, because the Orban is not very well placed in the polls right now. So Orban has been in power since 2010. And for the first time ever, he's being threatened by another party, TISO, which is led by Peter Magyar, who used to be a member of Fidesz, the party of Orban, but left the party a couple of years ago after a scandal and created his own party. And now that party, TISO, is leading the polls by 8 to 10 points. I think they are like 38%, 36, 38%, where Orban's party is at 26 something. So Orban, for the first time, is under every pressure and training in the polls, and so using that to get political advantages is not something that would be unheard of from Orban, who is always an adept of hardcore political campaign methods. Let's say it like that. And again, he has made his opposition to Ukraine like the cornerstone of his campaign, saying, if the other sides pass, then we will be at war with Russia. We will be dragged into decline by Ukraine and the EU. It's terrible. Ukraine is terrible, etc., etc. I don't think that it is a coincidence that elections are coming up, she said. Asked about this possible connection, Kallas trod more carefully, saying that discussion should continue to find a workable solution. The European Commission has convened a meeting of the Oil Coordination Group for Wednesday. We know that there are elections coming in Hungary, but it's very hard for me to see, considering and knowing the history of Hungary, that people of Hungary would actually support not helping the people of Ukraine that are in need, Kallas said. I find it very hard to believe that it will bring you any bonus point in this election. And so all this culminated today with the commission that was coming to Kyiv to present the package to Ukraine, say, look, it's the 4th anniversary since the beginning of the war, but we are helping you, and we are going to disburse already 90 billion euros for you, so keep on the good fight, we are backing you, and you'll make it. So it was everything was done to kind of boost the morale of Ukraine on this date. And of course, Hungary put kind of dropped a bit of a grenade on that plan. So the EU is going to Ukraine empty-handed thanks to Hungary. When European Commission and Council President Ursula von der Leyen and Antonio Costa arrive in Kiev for a day of remembrance on Tuesday, they will have little to offer other than condolences. 4 years to the day since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine began, the EU hoped to bring some comfort in the form of fresh sanctions against Moscow and €90 billion loan to Kiev. Hungary has stopped this from happening. After a brutally cold winter in Ukraine, months of peace talks that have produced little more than political theater, and with Russia showing no signs of stopping its barrage of attacks, bearing in mind that they attacked particularly the energy infrastructure of Ukraine to try to exploit the cold and keep the civilian population in freezing weather. We're talking minus 20 in some areas of Ukraine at the harshest of the winter. Of course, to put pressure on Ukraine to kind of break their morale and push them to accept a bad peace. So the EU had been confident that it could finally bring Kiev some concrete help. But the carefully choreographed support was spoiled when Hungarian Foreign Minister Péter Szijjártó announced his country would block Europe's 20th round of Russian sanctions because of an oil dispute Budapest has with Ukraine, ratcheting up the two countries' long-simmering feud. He also threatened to use Budapest veto to hold back the 90 billion loan that EU leaders agreed in December to finance Ukraine's defense against Russian forces. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban demonizes Ukraine for political gain inside Hungary. The Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha told Politico. We demand Budapest stop dragging Ukraine into Hungary's domestic politics. Hungary is holding a general election in April, in which Orban ruling party, Fidesz party, is lagging behind in the polls. With the EU's foreign affairs chiefs gathered in Brussels on Monday for a meeting intended to approve the sanctions, they also couldn't contain their fury. Hungary's move marked a new low for Orban, Sweden's Europe Minister Jessica Rosencrantz told Politico. We've seen in previous decisions that Hungary is not acting in a way of sincere cooperation with other EU states, which is a requirement under EU law. That should send an alarm to many of us. We're seeing what Orban is doing, is using Ukraine as a punching bag. German Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul said he was astounded about the Hungarian position, while his Polish counterpart Radosław Sikorski said he expected a much greater feeling of solidarity from Hungary for Ukraine. The crux of Hungary's row is the Druzhba pipeline, which stretches 4,000 kilometers from eastern Russia to Central Europe, providing vast quantities of oil for Hungary and Slovakia. Both have exemptions from EU sanctions on import of Russian refined oil. The pipeline has been offline since January 27th, when Ukrainian authorities said a Russian strike damaged it. But Budapest and Bratislava aren't buying that, accusing Ukraine of intentionally keeping the pipeline inoperative. Szijjártó went as far as to claim Kyiv was trying to orchestrate an energy crisis in Hungary ahead of the country's election. There is no technical or operational reason preventing the restart of oil transit, Szijjártó said. It's therefore obvious that Ukraine's decision is purely political, an attempt to pressure Hungary in coordination with Brussels and the Hungarian opposition, so it's all a plot. We will not give in to blackmail. Kyiv and its allies have long called for European countries to wean off Russian oil, which most EU countries managed to do, with Moscow's energy profits filling its war chest. Most have done so, with the exception of Hungary and Slovakia, Hungary having even increased its dependence on Russian oil. As the war of words continued, Ukraine's Sybiha said Hungary and Slovakia should send their concerns to the Kremlin. Russian oil accounted for 92% of Budapest energy imports last year, according to the Center for Study of Democracy, a European policy institute. Orban has frequently argued his country has no viable alternative to Russian import. Budapest last week called on Croatia to supply it with seaborne shipments of Russian oil via its Adria pipeline in order to replace the supplies lost as a result of the Druzhba closure. Croatia has long offered to step in to help Hungary with its energy needs, arguing it has more than enough capacity, but Zagreb has refused to transport Hungary's purchase of Russian oil. So you're saying, okay, we can provide you with energy, we just don't give you Russian oil because, well, it's banned, so we're not going to give you Russian oil. There are other oil coming from other countries you can use, but Hungary is refusing. A barrel bought from Russia may appear cheaper to some countries, but helps fund war and attacks on Ukrainian people, Croatian Energy Minister Andrei Susna said last week. Hungary, which once claimed Croatia didn't have the capacity to move Budapest's oil's need, was shifting the goalpost by demanding Zagreb transport Russian oil, a European diplomat with knowledge of the conversation told Politico, granted anonymity. They are entangling themselves more and more in their lies, the diplomat said. Orban had agreed to Ukraine's wartime financial lifeline on the basis that Hungary, alongside Czechia and Slovakia, would be exempt from paying down the EU loan. But the dispute over the Druzhba pipeline has forced me to reconsider my position, Orban wrote on Monday in a letter to Costa, seen by Politico, again accusing Ukraine of slow-walking repairs. So basically they're saying, oh, well, yes, we agreed in December, but, situation has changed, it's complicated, Ukraine is mean to us, so then we need to put the veto now because the situation is not the same as before, even if it's completely unrelated to the loan in itself. Hungary can block the 90 billion loan because one of the three pieces of legislation underpinning the financial aid also requires EU unanimity to expand the cash buffer of the EU long-term budget to issue the loan. Lithuanian Foreign Minister Kęstutis Budrys said he was really upset and frustrated, added Hungary's move not only calls the EU support for Ukraine into question, but its unity and ability to act decisively when major decisions are constrained by unanimity. I hope that Europe can deliver, he said, and that tomorrow it won't be the situation when we will be saying, we are sorry, 20th package is not there, we are sorry, 90 billion maybe next month, maybe somewhere in the future. And I think to compensate, Van der Leyen has announced today that they were unlocking like 100 million payments for another fund that I think for the my instinct is telling me that it's a safe, so it's the financing for defense, but I'm not sure. But in any case, she said, "Oh, okay, we can't give you 90 billion, but from next week we're already unlocking 100 million euros for another things that we are financing, so that way they can still wave a bit of EU cash to Ukraine, say, hey, we're still giving you some stuff." So yeah, Orban being Orban, although he's crossing a line there because again he's done something that he has never done before, which is coming back on his words. Orban is a big, its specialty is to use vetoes to obtain concessions. That's his signature move. But until now, once there was an agreement, once he had agreed to remove a veto or to conclude a deal with the others, he had always respected his word. He never came back on his decision. This is the first time that he's doing so, breaking the principle of sincere cooperation of the treaty, and also breaking the trust with the EU member states, because the EU leaders were always like, okay, Orban is a pain in the ass, but he's someone we can negotiate with, and once we find a deal with him, he's letting things going through. But now, as he's getting closer to potential election that would kick him out of power, there is no more limits to that. Do we have questions on that before I move on to the second topic of the day, which is the I was going to say the EU-US trade war, but rather the tariffs, following the Supreme Court decision on that. Let me just quickly check something. Okay. Just give me a second. Yeah, that works. Okay. Okay. No questions. No questions. Fine. Let's dive into our next topic, which are the tariffs. So now we're going to the US. So, reminder previously, you may remember that Trump, the orange guy, in April last year, had declared a trade war on basically the entire planet, except Russia and North Korea, announcing tariff against everyone by virtue of national security, trade imbalance, etc., etc. With tariff going into the 90, 100%, depending on the country he liked or didn't like. The EU, I think, was at 30, 40%, I think, tariff at some point. And so after the initial removal of the tariff, because the American economy was going to shit because people were like, what the fuck is he doing? He removed the tariff. They threatened to reinstate them for those who didn't negotiate deals. And the EU negotiated the deals in August, by which they were agreeing to a deal that was deeply in favor of the US, but far less terrible than what would have been the alternative, and agreeing to a blanket tariff of 15%. So most of the EU imports to exports to the US would be subject to a 15% tariff. Fast forward to last week, the US Supreme Court, so the highest authority in the US, decided that the tariff announced by Trump were actually illegal, that Trump did not have the authority, did not have the right to pronounce blanket tariff via executive orders. That's something that only the Congress could do. So that made the entire, all his tariff until now completely illegal. And so the question is, okay, what's going on now? What do we do? And immediately after the announcement of the decision, Trump announced a bunch of new tariffs to replace the old ones. So that's what we're reading now. So the new US tariffs take effect after the Supreme Court ruling. The new tariffs are justified as a means to deal with the large and serious United States balance of payment deficit, according to the White House. Fresh US tariff on imported goods came into effect on Tuesday as President Donald Trump moved to rebuild his trade agenda after the Supreme Court ruled against a swath of his global duties. The new tariff, initially set at 10%, are justified as a means to deal with the large and serious United States balance of payment deficit, according to a White House statement released on Friday. So they say the US is frustrated because they say, we are importing much more stuff from outside the US than we are selling to other countries, so that's unfair. We want them to buy more from us, or to tax their exports. Bear in mind that when you put tariff, so when you import something, you have to pay a tariff, so a bunch of money, a tax on that import. That tariff is not paid by the country from which the good is coming from. So if Trump is putting tariff on French products, it's not France that is paying a 15% tariff on the amount. It's the one that is importing in the US. So that's the American company that is importing the product from France that will pay an extra 15% on the price. So actually, the tariff is not a tax directly on non-American countries. It's a tax first and foremost on American companies and consumers who buy stuff that is non-American. The impact on the Europeans, on the non-Americans, is just that it makes their products more expensive to buy. Utopia. We're talking tariff. Where was I? So fresh US tariff on imported goods came into effect on Tuesday as President Donald Trump moved to rebuild his trade agenda after the Supreme Court ruled against a swath of his global duties. The new tariffs, initially set at 10%, are justified as a mean to... I'm literally rereading what I just read. I'm tired. Trump has since vowed to raise this level to 15%, with exclusion expected to remain for goods covered by sector-specific investigations and the US-Mexico-Canada Trade Pact. I don't know why I speak in French. Hello, so rather. The US president has doubled down on imposing tariffs on trading partners since the High Court on Friday struck down many of his sweeping and often arbitrary duties in a rebuke of his signature economic policy. His sector-specific tariff on goods like steel and auto remain intact, but the ruling sets the stage for a complex fight for refunds elsewhere. So, what the court has said is that Trump does not have the right to, by himself, decide to impose a default tariff on everything. He can't say, well, now I'm putting a 5, 10, 15% tariff on everything that enters. That's illegal. That's a tax. Only the Congress can impose tax. So it has to go through the Congress. However, give me a sec. Boom. Voilà. However, what he can do still is to impose tariff on specific sectors. Because of investigations, because of investigations showing that there is a problem, an alleged problem in that sector, then the president can decide to impose tariff on that specific sector. So all the tariff that Trump has done on specific sectors, for instance, steel, that remains in place because that is part of the president's power. But everything that is horizontal rule, he can't do it. Only the Congress can decide that, at least on the legal basis that he has used. The US president has doubled down on imposing tariff on trading partners since the High Court on Friday struck down many of his sweeping and often arbitrary duties in a rebuke of his signature economic policy. Because Trump has made tariff like the cornerstone of his economic policy and trade policy, saying, okay, I'm going to put tariff on everyone in the world that will incentivize Americans to buy American products, but also foreign countries to buy more American stuff, so that then it rebalances the relationship, and also the industries that are implanted outside of the US would be incentivized to open new facilities, new factories in the US, because then they would be able to produce for the American market without having to pay tariffs. So that's the tariff are the main political tool to feed the economic and industrial policy and trade policy of Trump. So the fact that the Supreme Court has said no, you can't do that, big problem for him. His sector-specific tariff on goods like steel and auto remain intact, but the ruling sets the stage for a complex fight for refunds elsewhere. Why do I keep rereading the same thing? I'm tired. I need to scroll down more. And also the refund, because the risk there is that since the tariffs that were imposed last year are now illegal, that means that all the companies that paid tariff in application to that illegal order, well, technically, they could say, hey, I paid money that I should not have paid, reimburse me. So you need to go to court, etc., etc. So there is a possibility that the US state will have to repay all the money they collected through tariff to the companies that have made. And I know that Costco, I think, which is one of the big American retailer, has already announced they would sue the US government to get back the money that they paid on tariff. It's technically the customer that paid the tariff. Technically not. Technically, it's the supplier. So Costco, when they imported, they are the one who paid the tariff. But what they can do, is that they then increase the price of the consumer to compensate for that. So you could have indeed the thing that could happen is, let's say Costco imported something that was initially valued at $100. Trump has put a 15% tariff, so they pay now $115 to import the thing. They sell it to their consumer at $115 because they say, okay, I paid tariff, I'm going to get reimbursed my tariff. So people buy at $115. But now the tariff are illegal. So Costco could say, well, the $15 that you taxed me for a year, you need to reimburse me. But the consumer is not going to be reimbursed. So technically, that means that the Costco, if there is no mechanism to pay back also the consumers, could get an extra $15 benefit because that would be absorbed, that it would be reimbursed twice, kind of in a way. But I mean, knowing the US, I'm sure there's going to be class actions of consumers to ask the reimbursement of stuff, etc. So it's going to be like a judicial nightmare, for sure. The new duty, taking effect on Tuesday, only lasts for 150 days unless extended by the Congress and is widely seen as a bridge towards a more durable trade policy. The US Customs and Border Protection has said it would stop collecting tariffs struck down by the court starting Tuesday too. It separately said it would start collecting the new 10% tariff on Tuesday, so it's phasing out the old tariff and putting in place the new temporary one of 10% that is only valid for 150 days. The Conservative Majority Court ruled 6-3 that Trump had exceeded his authority in using a 1977 law to impose sudden tariff on individual countries, which makes this defeat for Trump even more stinging because the Supreme Court is mostly composed of Republican judges, because the members of the court are appointed by the president, etc., and they are appointed for life. And currently, there is a majority of them who are Republican affiliated. And so even a court that is majority Republican affiliated said, well, no, Trump, actually what you're doing is wrong. So it stings even more for him. Trump's new tariff will apply to the $1.2 trillion worth of imports on an annual basis, or about 34% of the total goods imported, said Erica York, Vice President of Federal Tax Policy at the Tax Foundation. The Trump's tariff amounted to an average tax increase per US household of $1,000 in 2025, she added. 1977, was there a Republican president? I don't know, but it's just like the legal tool. Let's see. Who was president of the US in 1977? It's just that the law that gives the power, was Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter is a Republican, I think. Jimmy Carter, Republican, Democrat. Ah no, he was Democrat. Jimmy Carter was Democrat. And I think it was with a Democrat majority. But like who was president doesn't matter. Let's say it's the case in question is. That's why also Trump his decision was struck down. Is that it's a law that was not designed for what Trump used it for. So he's saying, yeah, you should not be able to do that. Yeah. So with Trump's global tariff imposed under the International Emergency Economic Power Act ruled illegal, his new and existing duties are still set to result in a household burden of $700 in 2026, she said. Trump insisted that the Supreme Court gave him far more powers and strength with its ruling, adding that he could use licenses to do absolutely terrible things to foreign countries. Which is true. I mean, even if he doesn't have that particular tool to bully countries around, he has plenty of other things he could potentially do to bully another country. And he has a wide array of things that he can use, even things that are not related to trade, to try to impose his will. But still, since he made tariff the cornerstone of his strategy, that's a blowback for him. With his tariff wings clipped, Trump needs a new tool to express displeasure on actions by others, said Wendy Cutler, a former US trade official. Threatening steep licensing fees is an alternative, but it lacks the flair and quantitative nature of tariff, added Cutler, senior vice president of the Asia Society Policy Institute. Trump also threatened on Monday to hike tariff on countries that choose to play games following the court's decision, in a warning to nations that recently struck trade deals with Washington under the threat of duties, because those countries could say, wait, the tariff that led to that trade deal are now illegal, so does the trade deal that we negotiated, is the trade deal that we negotiated actually still valid? Which of course is another political risk for Trump, because he bragged about, oh yeah, look, thanks to my decisions, I have concluded X million trade deals. If those trade deals start to unravel because of his defeat in court, that doesn't look good for him, especially as he has elections in November. Over the past year, Trump has imposed various tariff rates on partners, sometimes changing them on short notice, to casual and punish both friends and foe. He has used this as leverage in trade talks. US Trade Representative Jamie Sordgry said Sunday on CBS that tariff agreements remain in force despite the ruling. We expect our partners to stand by them. But the threatened 15% duties for some countries like Britain and Australia exceeds the 10% rate they faced under the previous program. Cutler warned that Trump's action could intensify US partners' disappointment. While it is doubtful that they would retaliate, they could step up efforts to diversify away from the United States, she said. And in the EU, these decisions arrive right at the moment where the parliament was supposed to vote on the trade deal that was concluded last year, that I was gonna say put an end, no, rather concluded truth in the trade war between the EU and the US. That trade deal, the vote on that trade deal was already postponed the first time in January. Why? Because of Greenland. Trump was threatening to invade Greenland, and so the parliament said, yeah, we can't validate a trade deal in these conditions, so they postponed the decision. And so this week they were supposed to vote the agreement, and now that court decision puts into question the legal basis of everything. So Parliament is like, okay, well then, again, we're going to postpone it because we don't even know what the fuck is going on. So the EU Parliament puts the US trade deal on ice after the latest Trump tariff hits. Trade MEPs punt a vote to implement the trade deal after Donald Trump sets new tariffs that they say violate the transatlantic accord. The European Parliament froze ratification of the EU trade deal with the United States on Monday amid concerns that President Donald Trump's latest tariff broadside breaches the terms of the transatlantic accord struck last summer. Senior trade lawmakers pulled the emergency brake after the US Supreme Court on Friday struck down the main tariff on which the deal, reached at Trump's Turnberry Scottish golf resort last July, had been based. Trump said on Saturday he would impose a global tariff of 15% under a new legal authority, triggering alarms across the bloc. The decision to postpone the vote on the implementation of the US deal is the right one. Given the current enormous uncertainty, a vote would be unjustifiable, said Anna Cavazzini, who represents the Greens. A second lawmaker, Zdeněk Zovko of the center-right EPP, confirmed the delay but nonetheless called for the European Parliament to hold a final vote on the Turnberry Accord next month. Because the EPP is scared that if the deal is postponed again or voted down, then it restarts the trade war, and that's bad for the economy, it's bad for the companies, etc., etc. So they're quite keen on having that deal secured because they don't want to relaunch the trade war. We have to act as Team Europe and have one voice, Zovko told Politico. I agree to postpone, but not unconditionally and not forever. We have to have a vote in March and we have to respect our side of the deal. Trump's latest tariff, invoked under Section 122 of the US Trade Act of 1974 and due to take effect on Tuesday, would appear to stack on top of any existing most favored nation rate. This, in view of Brussels, would be a direct breach of the Turnberry Accord and of a subsequent joint statement locking down the deal that, the EU argues, set an all-inclusive tariff of no more than 15% on most goods. I explain. Last year, so after that deal, the Turnberry Agreement, the deal with the US was, well, no matter what, the EU will never have a tariff rate more than 15%. You cannot put more than 15% tariff on our goods. That's the maximum we have to pay. Problem? So the tariff on the basis of which the agreement was done are revoked. So there's a question, okay, how does that work? But the replacement tariff that Trump just announced, it functions as, well, it's 10 or 15% that is added on top of existing tariff. So question mark. Does that mean that it supersedes the Turnberry Accord? Meaning that if, let's say, on a product, there is currently a 10% trade tariff, and so you have this new layer that adds on top, so plus 15%, that means that the EU will have to pay a 25% tariff because it comes on top of the existing one, which breaks the deal because the deal said no matter what, it can never be more than 15%. So the way these stacking tariff work has an impact on whether or not legally it respects the deal or not. Which is kind of specific to the EU because you may remember back then there was a discussion on whether the EU got a better or worse trade deal than the UK. The UK had a deal where that deal said, oh, we get a 10% tariff, and the EU got a 15%. And so many people say, oh, look, the UK got a better deal than the EU. The EU sucks. Which actually is not true, or more nuanced than that, because the nature of that deal is different. The EU deal says, no matter what, it can never be more than 15%, all inclusive. All the tariff that you're putting on products can never be more than 15%. The UK deal says something different. It says, you cannot add more than 10% additional tariff on UK product. What that means is that the base tariff still exists. It's just that you cannot add more than 10% on it. Which means that if you add on a product an existing 10% tariff, the US can add 10%. And so in overall, the UK would pay 20% tariff on that product. On the contrary, if you have a product that was at 0% tariff, then the UK would pay 10% tariff. So in most cases, the one majority of cases, the UK would have higher tariff than the EU, but in cases where there was 0% tariff, then and that it's not also the case for the EU, then the UK could have potentially a better deal than the EU, than the Europeans. But in most cases, actually the EU would have has a better deal, because our deal is an all-inclusive, while the UK deal it's a stacking tariff. So you add on top of what is existing. Trump doubled down on his tariff threat on Monday in a series of social media posts. Any country that wants to play games with the ridiculous Supreme Court decision, especially those that have ripped off the USA for years and even decades, will be met with a much higher tariff, and worse, than which they just recently agreed to, he said. Buyers beware. So basically saying, you concluded a deal with me, stick to that deal, otherwise I'm reinstating a straight war against you. Don't use that weakness that I have now with the Supreme Court. The European Parliament International Trade Committee had been due on Tuesday to vote through the legislation to enable the deal that included specific safeguards after reaching a hard-fought compromise earlier this month. One of the safeguards foresaw a 6-month review of the deal to ensure that tariffs on products containing steel were lowered to the baseline level. The second would have revoked the deal if Trump again threatened the EU territorial integrity, as he did when he proposed to annex Greenland in January, meaning that if in the future he was to say, oh, I'm going to conquer Greenland again, then the deal would fall. Cavazzini, a German MEP, said, the top priority must be to find a solution for the remaining 50% tariff on steel, aluminium, and derivative, which remain in place because they are sectorial tariff. The 15% deal is the default setup. But when you have like sector-specific rules, they prevail. So for instance, there are 50% tariff on steel, aluminium. They remain even after that deal with the US. And it still remains to be sorted out. The ball is now in the US courts. Tariffs are extremely unpopular and have not led to the industrial jobs promised by Trump. Croatian MEP Zovko, whose party favors the Turnberry deal, said MEP should still hold a plenary vote to implement it next month. If we stick to the deal, we can at least demand something from the Americans, she said. Confirming the delay, Bernd Lange, the chair of the Trade Committee, said business as usual is not an option. Senior trade lawmakers, known as shadow rapporteurs, so the negotiators from each of the political groups, will meet again next week to reassess the situation, the German Social Democrat added in a statement. Only once the Parliament adopts a position would it be possible to hold talks with the other branches of the EU, the Commission and the Council representing the 27 member states, to finally implement the EU side of the bargain. This would mainly entail scrapping duties on US industrial goods. And because the agreement is not like a fair or balanced in the sense that the US agreed to put a maximum of 15% tariff on our products. On our side, we agreed that on some category of product, we would put a 0% tariff, notably on industrial goods, lobster, and some things. So meaning that in a number of cases, quite a number of cases, Americans would not have to pay tariff, while we would have to pay tariff. So it's an unbalanced deal. It's a deal to the advantage of the Americans, but it was the far less terrible option, and most likely you could not have gone a much better deal than one we got. And as of today, we probably have the best deal out of all that were concluded by the US since last year. Yeah. So EU Trade Commissioner Maroš Šefčovič dialed into a call of the G7 trade minister on Monday and said afterwards in a post on X that full respect for the EU-US deal is paramount. He was also due to brief ambassadors from EU member states on Monday and EU lawmakers on Tuesday, Olaf Gill, the Commission's deputy chief spokesperson, said earlier. The EU executive, which negotiates trade deal on behalf of the bloc's 27 member countries, has expressed dismay at Trump's latest tariff move. The current situation is not conducive to delivering fair, balanced, and mutually beneficial transatlantic trade and investment, it said on Sunday, requesting full clarity from the Trump administration on the steps it intends to take after the Supreme Court ruling. Up. Any questions on that so far? Otherwise, I'm moving to the next. Looks like it's gonna be a shorter stream. Alright. Up. Let's continue. Out of curiosity, like I was wondering that like the other day. What's the nationality in chat? Type in your what's your nationality? I'm trying to assess like where the people come from in the that attend the English stream. To know what's the balance, because of course my French stream is mostly French and some Belgians. French plus Spanish, French, right? I know that normally you have there's Andras who is Hungarian, but seems that lately, actually, like even on my English stream, it's mostly French speakers, which then puts into question what's the point of doing an English stream if the people watching it are actually French speakers. But that's why also I need to assess that. Yeah. On a la ref. Alright, but for today we'll keep in English, but at some point that's going to be a discussion. I will need to have to decide what I do with the English stream. Okay, let's continue. So EU loses patience following Trump's latest tariff threat. The European Commission demands full clarity on Washington's plan as a top EU trade lawmaker calls to delay a key vote on EU-US trade deal. Let's keep talking in English between French people. That's natural. The EU is pushing Washington to clarify how the United States will proceed after the US Supreme Court struck down President Donald Trump's global tariff, the EU executive said on Sunday. The EU Commission requests full clarity on the steps the United States intends to take following the recent Supreme Court ruling on the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. The Commission said in a strongly worded statement issued after Trump announced Saturday he wants to impose a new global tariff rate of 15%. The current situation is not conducive to delivering fair, balanced, and mutually beneficial transatlantic trade and investment, the Commission said. EU Trade Commissioner Maroš Šefčovič spoke with US Trade Representative Jamieson Greer and Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick on Saturday as the EU grapples with the uncertainty of whether its trade agreement struck in Scotland last summer still applies in light of Trump's latest tariff threats. The quickly evolving situation pushed a senior EU trade lawmaker to urge the European Parliament to postpone a vote on legislation implementing the EU side of the deal, so that's what we were discussing in the previous article, so I can skip that one. Longer said he could not rule out renegotiating the agreement. The German Social Democrat, who is the president of the committee in charge of trade in the parliament, so the German Social Democrat earlier Sunday decried pure tariff chaos from the US administration in a social media post. No one can make sense of it anymore, only open questions and growing uncertainty for the EU and other US trading partners, he wrote. The terms of Thornberry Agreement and the legal basis on which it was built have changed, Longer said in the post on X. Do new tariffs based on Section 122 not constitute a breach of the deal? Regardless, no one knows whether the US will adhere to it or even be able to, he added in his post. At our extra meeting tomorrow, I will therefore propose to the Parliament's negotiating team putting legislative work on hold, so that's what was decided actually today. One day after the Supreme Court struck down his signature tariff policy, Trump on Saturday announced he plans a new global tariff of 15%, lifting the rate from 10%. So first he said, I'm putting 10%, and then like 5 minutes later, he said, oh no, now it's 15%. Classic Trump. To do so, he invokes Section 122 of the 1974 US Trade Act, which allows the president to impose tariff up to 15% to address a large and serious balance of payment deficit that can remain in effect for no more than 150 days unless the US Congress authorizes an extension. So now the question mark is whether Congress would allow it to go further, which could be possible because Congress currently is dominated by the Republicans. Question being, as elections are approaching, would they want to risk bearing the responsibility of increasing costs for American companies, American consumers, and etc., or not? Also because there are a number of Republicans who are actually not very happy with that the trade policy of Trump, and they don't agree with the systematic tariff that they are putting. And you also have in the current Congress a number of congressmen who are not running again for election, so they don't give a shit about Trump, and they are, a number of them, extremely vocal on the fact that actually Trump is doing shit. So they have nothing to lose in the November election, and so if they are asked to vote to accept or not the new tariff, they could perfectly vote against it with the Democrat and say, well, I don't give a shit. In any case, I'm not running again in November. Screw you. And it might be too late for Trump to then impose new tariff, because if he loses the elections in November and the Congress becomes dominated by the Democrats, that's his entire trade strategy that fails. At least as long as he uses this legal basis. The temporary US tariff regime would significantly ease the burden on Brazil, China, and India, which had like way more than 15%, like they were at 20, 30, 40, 50%, so for them like 10%, 15% is already a boon. But it would increase it on the EU by an estimated 0.8% average percent point to an effective rate of 20.5%, according to an analysis by the Global Trade Alert. The vote in the European Parliament, scheduled for Tuesday, is meant to confirm the institution's position on a law that removes tariff on US industrial goods and lobster, a key plank of EU pledges under a deal struck at Trump's Thornberry Golf Resort last summer. Why industrial goods and lobster, specifically? Because Trump wants to push new factories to be open in what is called the Rust Belt. That's the former industrial core of the US, where you had tons of steel plants, tons of car industry, etc., etc. So it's a way, removing the tariff on these goods is a way to allow these companies to sell more and so hire more people, etc., etc. And why lobsters? Because bear in mind that the Rust Belt in the US voted largely for Trump, so they are a core supporters of Trump, so he has an interest in pleasing them. Same thing for the lobsters. Why? Because I think it's Maine that has part of its economy that is running on lobster fishing. They were having issues over the past couple of years because of disease and everything, so being able to tell them, oh look, I'm removing tariff on your lobsters, so that means you will be able to export them, not for free, but at a cheaper cost to the EU. I'm opening new markets for you. Look, I'm great. Vote for me again. So it's not like an innocent choice, the fact that the US required removal of tariff on these specific goods. The delay proposed by Lange will have to garner support among the EU's political groups during an extraordinary meeting set for Monday afternoon. The Greens, via their lead lawmaker on the file, Anna Cavazzini, said the vote on the temporary agreement in the European Parliament should be paused until we have clarity, which now has been agreed. Not the deal, but the postponement. It was clear that Trump's tariffs were illegal and under international law. Now we also have confirmation that they were also illegal under US law, she said in a statement on Friday. And I have a final article that kind of answers the uncertainty that the EU had. Okay, what does that mean for our trade deal? Does that our trade deal stops to be applicable because of the Supreme Court? Trump has since said that no, everything is fine. So Trump spares the EU and the UK from higher tariff rates for now. Tariff on exports to the United States will remain at 10%. US President Donald Trump has U-turned on his threat to raise his new global tariff to 15%, sparing Britain and the European Union from higher rates. Tariff on exports to the United States will, for now, remain at 10% under the White House new regime, which took effect on Tuesday morning. Trump's decision not to follow through on the threat means continuity for British businesses. UK exports already face 10% duties, plus most favored nation rates under Trump's Liberation Day. The most favored nation rate is the minimal tariff you pay on a good. I think it's. You're right for the final article. That's the most favored nation clause. It's a WTO, so the World Trade Organization kind of clause, which says the lowest tariff you give to a country outside the scope of a trade deal is the tariff that must be applied to every country in the world. So that's the most favorable conditions are applied to everyone. And so there, for the UK, if they pay, that's what I was explaining earlier, if the minimum tariff rate, so the most favored nation rate, is 10%, they get an extra 10% on it. The EU will remain at the 15%. It also sees a similar level of tariff applied to exports from the European Union as before. Products coming from the EU were previously hit with a 15% tariff or the MFN rate, depending on which was higher. Meaning that if the MFN rate was 10%, it stays at 10%. If the MFN or another rate was above 15%, it will remain at 15%. Because of the deal says all inclusive, it can never be higher than 15%. The European Parliament froze ratification of the EU trade deal on Monday amid concerns that Trump's latest tariff broadside breaches the terms of the transatlantic accord struck last summer. Speaking with USTR Jamison Greer, so the trade representative, American trade representative over the weekend, UK trade chief Peter Kyle underlined his concern about further uncertainty for businesses and reinforced the need to honor the UK-US deal reached last May. A number 10 spokesperson, so number 10 is the office of the Prime Minister, told reporters on Monday. That's mostly for the UK, all this. The deal lowered Trump's sectoral tariff on steel and aluminium, autos and aerospace. Trump's new duties will apply to exports not covered by the Economic Prosperity Deal, which is the deal with the UK. Trump's latest tariff will be imposed for 150 days from today under the Section 122, as Greer and his department carry out further investigations using tools like Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962 to impose additional sectorial tariffs. So since he can't put any more blanket tariff, that's illegal, he can only do sectorial tariff, and so they need time to do their investigation, so they bought 150 days of peace. After the 150 days expire, the Congress could also vote to extend the duties. What will happen when the 150 days allowed by the Act expires? asked Duncan Edwards, CEO of British American Business Congress. Business. Congress, he said, will have to decide whether the trade policy promised by this administration during the election become enshrined in law. Given the narrow margin in both houses of Congress, a definitive answer looks unlikely, so businesses would be wise to expect continued uncertainty. Do we have questions on that? Or on anything? Because that was my final article for the day. So, since we are very early, we can discuss about pretty much anything else. And I see more French in the in the chat, which reinforce me like. I'm just looking at people who are in the chat right now. Like, I think that apart from a couple of people, I'm certain that all of you are French or French speaking. There's only 2 names that I don't recognize in the list. Oh, sorry. Just getting rid of notifications. Bim, bam. Boom. Okay. You're that late. No, it's not that you're that late. It's that I'm that early. It's we had only 2 topics for today. Does Trump has a limit to the tariff percent? What do you mean? That he can never go above a certain tariff? Because technically, no. I mean, okay. In the regime that was that just got declared illegal, Trump had no limit. He he put 100+% tariff on China at some point, so there was no limit. With the current system, he cannot go. In the current system, I don't think he can go like as high as he did before. He can only put a limited blanket, because he can't individualize country by country, at least for now. So as far as I know, at the moment he can't go as high as he was going before, which is why, like in the article, 15% maximum. Thanks, Remer. Which is why Brazil, China, India were very happy with that, because under the previous regime they were at 40-50%. So for them, that transition, that period right now, is already very good for them. It's much better than what they had for the past year. The question then is, how far in 150 days the US administration will be able to go to impose sectorial tariff, because that's what they're doing now. They can't do blanket tariff, but they can still do sectorial. And the sectorial, they can go high. For instance, on European steel, for now we have a 50% tariff rate, so it can go fairly high. But to do this sectorial tariff, they need to do formally investigations, so that demands time. So that's why he puts like the 10% tariff for 150 days to buy time. And then how many will he be able to investigate in that 150 days? Question mark. Did Trump try to avoid imposed tariff on Hungary and co? No. Not on that, because it's very difficult actually. As far as the EU is concerned, it's very difficult. Because we have the single market and the customs union. Technically, you could say, okay, I'm only putting tariff on French products or Spanish products, etc., etc. But it's very hard, because you need to be sure about the rules of origin. You need to be sure that only the stuff that is made in France, made in Spain, made in whatever is taxed. And within the EU, since you have, because of the single market, a lot of products that cross the borders or that have components that come from different parts. So for instance, you have a car that is made in Hungary. You will have parts that come from Germany, you have parts that will come from France, you have parts that will come from China, from elsewhere, etc., etc. And so that makes it difficult then to do individual, for those that are non-European, it's easy because you always have the rules of origin, but for the rest, you don't necessarily track inside the single market that it's made in France, made in Germany. It can get lost into the supply chain. So that makes it very complicated to say, I'm going to exempt from tariff Hungary. Because the investigation you will have to do in terms of rules of origin would be very complicated. Especially since you can have a Hungarian product that goes to Spain and then is exported to the US. So you will have to survey everything because single market customs union. So they have not. I mean, I don't think like no, I'm not 100% certain that he has not tried. But like when you had when you had Liberation Day last year, he didn't do country by country. He said EU 20, 30, 40%. He didn't say, oh, Hungary, you get a more better deal. France, you get X%, etc., etc. The only moment where he said, oh, I'm going to put tariff on that country or that country was, for instance, when you had negotiations on NATO, for instance, so now NATO has new rules that says that countries must invest 5% of their budget into defense. When that was negotiated, Spain didn't want it to. Spain said, no, I don't want to put 5%. That's stupid. I only want to do 2 or 3%. And Trump said, oh, Spain, if you piss me off, I'm going to increase tariff on you. But it was more of a threat, an empty threat, than something that he announced. Likewise, when France was resisting Trump in the negotiations on the trade deal, he said, oh, I'm going to put 200% tariff on French alcohol, on French wine. So he's using that more as a threat more than something that he actually announced. Spain said 2.1. It's possible. Like Spain didn't want it to pay more into defense. In any case. Any more questions on that or otherwise? Now it's we're free rolling. Any questions goes. Otherwise, we'll slowly close early. That means I may be able to finally have dinner before 10 in the evening. Such luxury. Again, checking the names. Yeah, still the same. Like, there's only a couple of you. I'm not certain you're not French speakers. Which means like I have this discussion every month with Jean on the maintaining like one stream in English and one stream in French. Since now I have the much bigger audience, or much bigger. Okay, that's an exaggeration. I have the bigger audience on the French stream. Is it still viable to maintain the English stream? But yeah, I need to look into that. Do you think there is a possibility for two-speed Europe? That depends how you define two-speed Europe, but we are clearly heading towards some level of two-speed Europe. So two-speed Europe is the idea that instead of having policies of the EU that are implemented by all 27 countries at the same time, you could have policies that are implemented by only one part of the EU and the rest will not apply it because they will not go further, etc., etc. Historically, EU prefers to move as a block, 27 by 27. But given the level of internal division and the lack of political consensus among member states, and the increased economic pressure and everything, there is increasingly the willingness to explore what is called enhanced cooperation, which is a tool that exists currently in the treaties that allows a group of at least 9 countries to implement a EU policy by themselves, and the other will not join if they don't want to join. And so that's von der Leyen recently said that could be something that could be explored. You have the E6 group, so the top 6 economies that are the biggest group country of the EU that are thinking about it. So there is a scenario where at least the idea of doing more enhanced cooperation, and so forms of two-speed Europe in some areas could become a reality. That is a possibility because of the lack of consensus between member states, and to circumvent problems of vetoes and stuff like that. But again, the problem with enhanced cooperation is that they are actually quite complicated to do. Because first, for enhanced cooperation to happen, you need first to have tried to do it with all 27 member states. It failed, and so you fall back on a smaller group. And it needs to respect the interest of the other member state, blah, blah, blah. So it's actually a rather complicated and long process. That's why you don't have a lot of example of enhanced cooperations until now. Like there's only like a few examples, and I'm not even sure if this enhanced cooperation like worked very well. I mean, you still have other example, and Schengen technically it's only a group of countries that implement it. The Eurozone also to a certain extent is a form of two-speed Europe. Not exactly, but yeah, that's you have already a precedent of not all countries implementing a EU policy at the same time. It's not a problem if you have questions, ask them. Huh? That's I'm fine. I'm not going to die to combust if I get questions. I'm used to it. Ask away if you have burning questions. Oh, okay, that can. And otherwise, what was I going to say? I don't remember. You okay for tonight? Okay. So then let's do the conclusion. So next time I see you, you will have questions after the VOD. But you can watch the VOD and you can ask them on Friday. Next time I see you this week, Friday, for the news review in French at 5 as usual. Next week is gonna be a bit of a different agenda, because we will have the news review in French and in English, but we will also have an interview with Vincent Guerre, who is someone who has written a book about EU policy, and so we're going to have an interview with him. I know him personally. He used to be a colleague with me. He used to be a colleague of mine in the parliament. So we'll talk about his book. We'll talk about, like, he's now a lobbyist like I am. So we can talk about the transition outside the parliament. So the interview will be on Friday. I haven't decided yet whether the interview will be in French or in English. So stay tuned. But yeah, next week there's going to be an extra content, which is going to be the interview with Vincent Guerre on his book and other topics. So yeah, I hope that you like today's shorter news review. As usual, thanks for coming. If you have a Prime lying around, do toss a coin to your streamer. That's appreciated. Do follow me on the other social media. Up, you have the links right now. And yeah, on this note, I wish you all a good evening. And I will see you either on Friday or next week for further adventures. Bye everyone, have a good one. See ya.